Katie, put a song on. Your choice this time.
Can't explain all the feelings that you're making me feel.
My heart's in overdrive and you're behind the steering wheel.
Daniel, smash it!
I believe in a thing called love. Just listen to the rhythm of my heart. There's a chance we can make it now. We're a thing called love.
Oh, yeah!
Route updated.
Guitar!
Pretty sure that's Alan's favorite song. It's great to be with you this morning. There's a big difference, isn't there, between, passing a car where someone's traveling on their own, but they're singing at the top of their lungs. You ever had that experience? There's a big difference between that and then traveling past a car that's full of people and they're all singing at the top of their lungs, right? I mean, the first car, you kind of feel bad for the guy. You're almost laughing because you're making fun of him. But then the other car that you see, there's a part of you that's like smiling with them. There's a part of you, maybe just a brief part of you for a second, that wishes that you were in the car with them, kind of singing along at the top of your lungs. Well, last week we kicked off 2019 and we kicked off this series by talking about where we're going as a church. And we looked out the windshield towards our tomorrow with the hope that by the end of this series that you'll carpool with us, that you'll jump in the car and go along with us. And the truth is there's a lot of value in us carpooling together, that we can see more and do more, experience and accomplish more, that if we go together, we'll laugh more and celebrate more. And even though all those things are true, the truth is that carpooling isn't always easy, that at times it means that you have to listen to songs and music that you don't know or music that you don't enjoy. At times it's uncomfortable because you have to make space for other people, that you're kind of crammed in, and because you have to make space for other people, it requires some of us to say no to taking some things that we would normally want to take on a trip with us. So we have to say no to some good things that we value in order to make space for other people. And at times that can be uncomfortable, at times that can be difficult. But whatever the cost and whatever the concessions, whatever the sacrifice, it's worth it if it means that we can bypass the gridlock and kind of hit that left-hand lane together. And so we talked about this idea of us carpooling, and regardless of what it cost and regardless of the sacrifices, that we would go together, because as difficult as it can be at times, it's far more rewarding. The truth is you can get there on your own. You can get to our tomorrow on your own, but the reality is that traveling alone is exhausting, and at times, let's be honest, traveling alone is boring. I mean, it might be okay for a few minutes or for a little while. You can be free to your own space and your own thoughts, but after a while, it's just exhausting to travel on your own. It's far funner and far more enjoyable when we carpool and when we go together. We'll see more and do more and experience more, and I believe we'll discover more. Discover more about God, discover more about other people, and in reality, discover more about ourselves. If for some reason you missed last week, or if today's your first time at the Bridge, I would encourage you to go to our webpage, bridgechurches.ca, and watch last week's message, because it wasn't simply the launching point for this series or the launching point for 2019. Last week's message was really the launching point for this next chapter of the Bridge. But for today and for the next 2 weeks, what I want to do is focus in on some specific things that are going to become more prominent in our approach as we continue on towards the destination that's in front of us, the destination that Jesus himself mapped out for us. Because as we said last week, our destination, our command, our mandate was one that was instituted years and years ago by Jesus himself. And way back when, it wasn't up for debate when he revealed it to his disciples, and it's not up for debate today. The destination that Jesus mapped out when he pointed out the windshield with it for his 12 disciples, he said, I want you to make disciples. That's the destination, that's the mandate, that's the command, that's the goal. I want you to make disciples. And the directions were simple and clear. It was one word, go. I want you to go, and the destination that I want you to go to is a place where you make disciples. And that destination is the destination that we're still going towards today, and we're following those simple directions to go. The direction was not to wait. The direction was not to put on services and wait for people to come to you and make disciples. The direction was to go, and the destination was to make disciples, to make followers of Jesus Christ. And that's where we're going. And in order for us to get to our tomorrow, in order for us to fulfill the command that Jesus gave, in order to get to our tomorrow, we have to do the opposite of what he, meaning Jesus, told others to do. And yes, you heard me right, and yes, you read that right. that to get to our tomorrow, we're going to do the exact opposite of what Jesus commanded other people to do because we want to accomplish today the very thing that Jesus was trying to avoid happening way back then. Now, I know it's early and I haven't had that much coffee. Some of you might wonder if I'm asleep at the wheel, so just hang with me, buckle yourselves in, and with the remaining time that we have together this morning, I want to kind of unpack and explain exactly what it is that I'm talking about. And in order to do that, we're going to look in the book of Mark. Mark is the second book in the New Testament. It's one of the 4 books that we refer to as the Gospels, the books that chronicle the life and the ministry of Jesus. So if you happen to have a Bible with you, I'd invite you to open it up or turn it on to the book of Mark chapter 1. And in Mark chapter 1, it's chock full. We see so many cinematic sequences. There's so many like big monumental moments that happen in Jesus' life in just one chapter, the chapter of Mark that we're going to focus in on, the first chapter. It starts out with Jesus going and being baptized by John the Baptizer. And after that, Jesus is then led into the desert where he's tempted and tormented for 40 days and for 40 nights. So he leaves the water and heads into the fire. And after he survives that experience, he comes back to the water and he's walking along the shore and he calls his first followers, his first disciples, Simon and Andrew, James and John. He calls these young men to follow him, and they carpool together onto a place called Capernaum. And when they get to Capernaum, Jesus encounters a man who was possessed by a demon. He was full of this evil spirit, and so Jesus spoke to this spirit, and the spirit left. He cast the spirit out of the man, and the disciples are like, what is happening? Like we didn't sign up for this. Like this is weird. We were just like doing some stuff. We were chilling on our own. And next thing we know, we're seeing this guy. This is craziness is happening. And there was a whole bunch of people that saw this event unfold. They saw this man who they could clearly tell had issues and he was struggling. He was possessed. And then all of a sudden Jesus speaks and this weird thing happens. And it's this, I don't know if it would be awesome in CGI to see how it all looked and everything happened. And next thing you know, they're just kind of standing there. And they probably responded the same way you are as I'm telling this story. It says that amazement gripped the audience and they began to discuss what had happened. And they said to each other, what sort of new teaching is this, they asked excitedly. It has such authority, even the evil spirits obey his orders. And so here's these young men surrounded by a bunch of people, again, who saw this man who they clearly knew was possessed by a demon, an evil spirit, and Jesus speaks and they've never seen anything like this before. They've never seen anything happen that this man has this authority and this command and his teaching is powerful. And it's casting out evil spirits and they're amazed and they're talking amongst themselves. And then the news about Jesus, as you can only imagine, spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. So one story, one encounter, one life change causes an entire region to hear the name of Jesus. And it didn't end there. It didn't end there. Shortly thereafter, Jesus goes to Simon's house and Jesus performs a miracle and heals Simon's mother-in-law. Apparently they had a good relationship. And so he heals this woman and it's like, you read through it as you read through Mark 1 and it's like no big deal. And so the next thing, she's making a meal. And the time between when he showed up to town and when he heals this woman and she makes a meal and they have this meal, the entire house is full of people. And not just any people, it's full of sick people. And it's full of people who are possessed. It's full of people who have all kinds of different infirmities. And Jesus, one after one, performs miracles. And one after one, he heals these people who came to him sick and possessed and dealing with all kinds of issues. Now, again, you have to understand that this was before Instagram. And this was before Facebook Live. That you couldn't just tune in from home and see what's happening. This was happening in real time and word was spreading firsthand. And as you can imagine, the whole town gathered at the door to watch. Do you see how quickly this is spiraling, almost out of control? That they can't keep a lid on what Jesus is doing in the lives of people. It's spreading. His name and what he's doing is spreading through the community like wildfire. There's no social media to help this word pass through the town. It's word to word to word, person to person to person. And now an entire town is gathering at the door to watch what Jesus is doing in the lives of people. And so the next morning, Jesus gets up and Jesus does what Jesus often did. As you read through the Gospels and the accounts of Jesus' life, he often went alone and on his own to pray. And so Jesus gets up the next morning and he goes off to pray and the disciples get up and they go looking for Jesus. And here's why. They went looking for him and when they found him, they said, Everyone is looking for you, right? I mean, we exaggerate a lot and we use like everybody's upset and everybody's this and everybody's that. We use those words a lot, but they're saying, look, we're not fooling around here. Everybody is looking for you. Because these stories of transformation are causing the name of Jesus to spread through these communities like wildfire. And as a result, everybody is looking for Jesus. So Jesus, in a span of 24 hours, becomes a celebrity. Jesus, in 24 hours, is like the rock star of rock stars. He is like the name above all names. And so Jesus grabs these guys and they carpool together to continue spreading his message and sharing his love and what he has for these people. And so as they carpool together, they encounter another man along the way, another man who is possessed. But he's not possessed by a demon. He's possessed and crippled by a disease. They encounter a man who has leprosy. A man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. If you are willing, he said, not if you're able. Not if you're able, Jesus, but if you're willing, you can heal me and you can make me clean, he said. So here's this guy. He comes before Jesus and he didn't come up to Jesus to hear him preach. He came before Jesus because he had a need and he had a belief that Jesus had the ability to meet his need. And why do you think he had that belief? Why do you think he believed that a man whom he'd never met had the ability to heal him if he was willing? Why did he believe that? He believed it because he'd heard stories of how Jesus has met the needs of other people. He didn't read it. He didn't read it years later. It didn't show up on his timeline. He heard firsthand from other people how Jesus had touched other untouchables, and their stories fueled his faith. What Jesus has done in their lives fueled his belief, and so now this man comes before Jesus and says, if you're willing, I know and believe that you're able to meet my need. So Jesus had compassion. Jesus had compassion, and he reached out and he did what no one else would do. He touched this man, a man whose disease had left him isolated and alone, and not just physically tormented, but tormented on the inside. This man was not only dealing with the disease externally, he was dealing with loneliness that was tearing him apart on the inside. People wouldn't even talk to this man, let alone touch him. And Jesus, in his compassion, does what no one else would do. And he touches this man, and instantly the leprosy disappeared, and the man was healed. Wow. Now, what do you think happened next? What do you think happened next? Jesus performs this incredible miracle. This man who was clearly struggling and dealing with this disease, this leprosy, this outward, external thing that was tearing him and his life apart. Jesus heals this man. What happens? Does Jesus say to the guy, hey, listen, man, I did a good thing for you. I healed you. So why don't you take me back to your village? Why don't you take me back to your family and let me preach to them? Or maybe he said, hey, listen, I've done a good thing for you. It's time for you to return the favor. Why don't you do something for me? Why don't you go back to your village? Or why don't you go back to your family and tell him all the things that I have done for you so that my name will become great? What do you think Jesus does in this moment in light of everything that he's done for this man? What he does, this is unbelievable. What Jesus does in these next moments is incredibly odd, given everything that we know about Jesus and everything we know about why Jesus came to this earth. What happens next? Jesus sent this man on his way with a stern warning. Don't tell anyone about this. I'm thinking, what? What? Don't tell any. Why? You've just done this incredible thing in my life. You've just performed this amazing miracle. You have freed me from this disease that's tormented me, and you don't want me to tell anyone? No, I don't. Instead, I want you to go to the priest, and I want you to let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy, and this will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed. So Jesus sends this man whom he's just healed on his way with a command to go before a priest. Because in those days, in that culture, what they needed to do was to go before a priest to be examined so that the priest could kind of give his stamp and say, this man is genuinely cleared of leprosy. He is not a risk to anybody. He can be out in public. He can be seen. He can be talked to. He can be touched. And as a result of that, there were certain sacrifices and rituals that he had to perform. Basically, Jesus was saying to this guy, listen, I want you to go do everything you need to do to fill your requirement to the law. But beyond that, I don't want you to say a thing about this to anybody. And as I've read this so many times in preparing for this morning, I keep asking myself, why? I mean, why would you put a lid on this thing? Especially in light of everything we know about Jesus. I mean, Jesus came to be the Messiah. We just are 3 weeks past celebrating that Jesus came into the world to be Emmanuel, God with us. That you couldn't argue a legitimate healing. You'd think that Jesus would leverage this opportunity and go back to where this man is from and say, listen, clearly this man had leprosy and I was the one that delivered him from this, and it would validate who he was and everything that he had to say. I mean, why were you telling me not to tell anybody about this? This is a curious thing. It's a curious thing when you look throughout the scriptures, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, as you read through Jesus' ministry, you see time and time again where Jesus encountered people, where he healed them, and he told them something very similar. Don't talk about this to anybody. Now, that didn't always happen. There was a time specifically in the book of Luke where Jesus comes across a man who was possessed by a demon, and not one demon, but multiple demons. And Jesus casts these demons out of this man. And as a result, the man who had been freed from his demons begged him to go with him. He's like, let me come with you. And Jesus instead sent him away saying, no, I want you to go back to your family and I want you to tell them everything that God has done for you. So here's one example at least where Jesus says, listen, I've done something in your life and I want you to go back and I want you to talk about it. But this is the exception to the norm. More often than not, when Jesus encountered people and when he healed people, he told them to say and do nothing. When you look in the book of Matthew chapter 9, you find that Jesus came along 2 blind men. They were, Bird Box extras or something, I don't know. And he finds these 2 blind people and he heals them. He gives these 2 men sight. And when he gives them sight, it says their eyes were opened. And Jesus sternly warned them, see that no one knows about it. And again, you have to ask yourself, or at least I do, why? Why, after you've done something incredible and miraculous in someone's life, would you not want them to talk about it? Could you do that? Would you do that? I mean, if instantly this morning you were freed from sickness, or if instantly this morning you were freed from bondage or that temptation or that addiction in your life, could you keep quiet about it? Could you walk out of here and tell no one? This man couldn't either. The man went, regardless of what Jesus had told him to do or not to do, this man went and he spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. And you can't fault the guy, right? I mean, the guy does what you and I would do, most of us, if not all of us, would do. I'm sure there was maybe a little thing in the back of his mind that he's thinking, man, I don't know if I talk about it, maybe Jesus will take the miracle back and I'll get my leprosy back. Maybe that was in the back of his mind, but I think that would be way back, because what this man is really thinking is, look, I've just been freed. Freed from my greatest pain, freed from my greatest bondage, free from all this isolation that I've been living in for so long. I'm freed, and I know you don't want me to say anything, Jesus, but I can't help myself. I am free at last, and I'm going to tell everybody I just can't help myself. And as a result, because this man went and spread the word, and because this man proclaimed to everyone what had happened to him, as a result, large crowds, right? Large crowds soon surrounded Jesus, and he couldn't publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay out in the secluded places, but people from everywhere kept coming to him. This is the reason why Jesus told this man and others like him not to say anything. Because Jesus knew that if word of his miracles went around, it would attract so much attention and create so much excitement that his movements would be inhibited. That if word of his miracles and all that he was doing, if it got out, he would be secluded. That he wouldn't be able to publicly enter a town anywhere. That he would be secluded and stuck out on the outskirts of town in these secluded places. If word got out of what Jesus was doing in the lives of people, he wouldn't be able to move freely about wherever he wanted to go. And back in that moment where he freed that person who was possessed by those demons, that man who he told to go home and tell everyone in his family about what had happened, that was in a moment where he was in an area that he was only in for a short period of time, and he wasn't concerned about being stuck there because he knew his intention wasn't to stay there very long. The reason Jesus told people like this man and others not to say anything was because he was trying to protect his purpose. Because Jesus knew that stories of life change would cause other people to come looking for Jesus. But Jesus also knew that his ultimate destination was Calvary, and that if things blew up too quickly, it could derail his purpose. And so Jesus told this man and others like him not to say anything in order to protect his purpose. But the time has come for us to do the opposite of what he told this man to do, because the circumstances and times have changed. That Jesus was trying to protect his purpose for a specific time and period of time, but now the time has changed. And it's time for us to tell stories, because Jesus knew that stories fuel belief. Stories fuel belief, and it's time for us to tell stories. It's time for us to tell your story. Do you know that every day of your life is another page in the story of your life? Every day of your life is another page in the story of your life, and it's a story that one day you're going to tell. Students in the room, one day you're going to fall in love. It won't be in middle school, might not be in high school, but one day, right, parents? One day you'll fall in love. You're going to find that person that you may want to spend the rest of your life with, and in that moment, you're going to tell that person your story. You're going to tell them about your past experiences, students, and you're going to tell them about your past relationships. You're going to tell that person what you said yes to and what you said no to. You're going to tell that person who you said yes to and who you said no to. Moms and dads, someday, you're going to tell your kids your story. You're going to tell them what you did when life got hard. You're going to tell them what you did when you had to make a difficult decision. You're going to tell your kids what you did when you were tempted the same way that they're tempted. You're going to tell them what you did when it felt like God was off and busier with someone else. And you're going to tell them about the time that God showed himself to you in a new way. Grandparents, someday, if not already, you're going to tell your kids your story, or your grandkids your story about your life and your experiences and how God revealed himself to you, how what you did when things were difficult in your life, or how you prayed for years before you saw any fruit of those prayers. Someday, you're going to be sitting at a coffee shop across the table from a friend or a coworker, and in that moment, they're going to be sharing their story with you. And they're going to be pouring their story out, and what they'll need in that moment is not another Bible story. When that moment comes, when they're pouring their story out and pouring out their heart, what they'll need in that moment is your story. What they'll need in that moment is not my story. What they'll need in that moment is your story. So when that time comes, when that moment comes, when you're sitting across the table from that person who needs to hear your story, the question you need to ask today in light of that conversation that could happen tomorrow, the question you need to ask yourself today is, what's the story you want to tell? When that time comes, when you're sitting across the table from that friend or that coworker or that family member that is desperately needing to hear your story, what's the story you want to tell? Things got tough, so I quit. She did that and I couldn't take it anymore, so I walked away. Temptation was just too much. I prayed one time and nothing happened, so I don't even know if I believe in God anymore. What's the story you want to tell? Because when that time comes, when that moment happens in your life, that person is going to need to hear your story. That someday God is going to put you in a position. God is going to put you in a position where your story will cause that person to see him in a new way. And as a result, they'll see what's happening in their life, the circumstances that they're going through in a new way. So when that moment comes, what's the story you want to tell? Because the truth is, your story could cause everyone to come looking for Jesus. Your story could cause everyone you know to come looking for Jesus. So, because we believe this, we want to do everything as a church to help you live the story that one day you'll tell. That as a church, we want to help you in any way we can live the story you want to tell. So that's why we're going to encourage and challenge and invite everyone to get connected within the context of a small group. Not simply so that you can know more, but so that you can be known. We won't just provide classes where you can come and get more information. We want to create environments and opportunities and spaces for you to be known for who you really are and where you really are, so that you can develop an intimacy and talk freely about where you really are and admit, hey, there's a gap between who I am and who I'd like to be. And that in those environments, it won't just be for adults. That we'll create opportunities and spaces and environments for those relationships to be built for our kids and our kids ministry, for our students in our teen ministry, and for adults of every ages in our adult ministry. So that you won't be forced to sit in a room with people where you feel the temptation and the pressure to fake it. You'll be in a room with people who love you for who and where you really are, but love you so much that they would refuse to let you stay there. And we'll create ministry opportunities, and we'll see this thread of discipleship that runs through every ministry, where we will begin to see our ministries not as silos where ministries do their own thing and kind of freely operate on their own, that every ministry of the Bridge will see that it's interconnected and equally a part of everything else that happens within the context of this church. And not just for that sake, not just so that ministries overlap, but more importantly, so that generations overlap. Because I believe a 60-year-old can learn a lot from a 16-year-old. And I believe a 16-year-old can learn a lot from a 60-year-old. I believe that a 6-year-old can teach a 26-year-old a lot about who they are, and that a 26-year-old can discover more of their purpose that God has for them because of their connection and relationship with someone who's 6 years old. I believe that, and we want to create opportunities and spaces for those generations to overlap. And one of the best ways we can do that is in the context of a small group, but it's also in providing opportunities for service. Alan put it best I think about a month ago or more, where he said that the best lives are the ones that are poured out in service to others. And that is so true. And we'll create ministry teams and opportunities where 14 and 40-year-olds can serve one another and minister with one another together. Because a 14 and a 40-year-old can learn a lot from each other when they serve one another and serve others together. And as a church, as we continue to move forward, as we continue to chase after the destination that Jesus mapped out for us, the Bridge will focus on being a storytelling church. As a church, we will be focused on being a storytelling church. And the reason that we'll be a storytelling church is because a storytelling church reflects value in every single person, young and old. That every person in this room this morning is living a story, and it's a story that someday someone is going to need to hear. And so as a result, every story that's represented in this room has value, and we want to do everything we can as a church to help you live the story that you want to tell. A storytelling church also empowers someone in the midst of their story. You know that's true, right? Many of you have probably experienced that. I know I have. It was just over a year ago that Lisa and I, as a couple, experienced the most horrible experience in our marriage. As many of you know, a little over a year ago, Lisa and I lost a child. And when that experience happened in our life, as much as we're celebrating our little Parker coming into the world, just over a year ago, we were experiencing such incredible heartache, and we were isolated. We felt pulled back and withdrawn. We were struggling with fears and doubts and questions, and we were asking questions of God and questions of ourselves, and it was difficult and painful. But last spring, both of us felt compelled to share our story with our church. And we did not expect what happened as a result of sharing our story. That there were people that came to us after hearing our story, and they were felt empowered to share with us their story. And hearing their stories fueled our faith. And hearing their stories fueled our belief. And our eyes were open to a world of hurt within this church that we had no idea existed. We were so overwhelmed with the response. but we felt empowered to continue on in our journey of faith and our journey of hope because of the stories we heard. And there were others that came to us and shared their story and said that this is the first time we've told anybody what we've been through. But they felt empowered to share their story because of us sharing our story. Stories fuel faith, fuel belief, and stories are so powerful. And so much healing came out of us sharing stories one with another. We'll continue to be a storytelling church because it affirms that this is a place that you can be known. I understand why you fake it at work. And I understand why you feel the pressure to fake it at the hockey rink, to put out an image that you're not really that person, but you feel this temptation and this pressure to be somebody you're not because you know there's a gap between who you are and who you want to be seen as. I get that. But if ever there was a place where you could be known for who and where you really are, it's this place right here. And it might not be in this context on a Sunday morning, but we want to create opportunities and spaces for you to be known for who you are. And it's this place right here. And lastly, we want to be a storytelling church. More than any of these three reasons combined, the main reason that we will focus as a church on being a storytelling church is because it directs praise to Jesus and it makes his name great. It makes his name great. We won't tell stories to make you a celebrity. And we won't share stories to make your friends and friend requests go up. We'll share stories to make the name of Jesus great because it's him and him alone who is worthy of the praise and the glory. And it's him alone who can change a heart and change a life and change a future. And so we'll be focused on telling stories. Now I can preach and I will continue to preach. I love these opportunities to open the Word of God with you and just pour my heart out and pour off the pages of Scripture. I will preach about marriage, and I believe that God has a lot to say about marriage and how to build and maintain and develop a healthy relationship. But I also think that it's incredibly important and powerful to leverage the experience and share the stories of couples who have been married for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? That we can see God's word lived out in flesh and blood when we hear those stories. That hearing those stories of those couples who have been there and done that and stayed the course and stayed true and fought for one another, we can be empowered in the midst of our marriages when we hear the stories of those who have done it far longer than I've been alive, right? I mean, your story matters. And my story matters. And if we focus on being a storytelling church, maybe we can flip the script. If we focus on being a storytelling church years from now, maybe it might be said of us as a church. But they, the Bridge, went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. And as a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus, and he couldn't be kept out of a town anywhere. He didn't have to stay out in the secluded places because people from everywhere kept coming to him. See, stories fuel belief. Stories of life change cause others to believe it's possible that their life could change. So when that time comes when you're sitting across a table from that friend or that coworker, that person that needs to hear your story, I want you to be able to tell the story you want to tell because you've lived the story you want to tell. And because of your story, your friend, your coworker, your kid, your teenager, your son, your daughter, your spouse, your grandchild, they will go looking for Jesus because of what they've heard he's done in your life. In your life. Stories fuel belief, and it points and gives glory and honor to Jesus Christ. And that's what we're going to be about as a church.